This short tutorial is going to show you how to draw a column graph. Every column graph should include title, labels, categories on the x-axis, and on the x-axis we should be including the independent variable, our numbers, which are usually the data that we record, or our dependent variable. This will go on our y-axis or the vertical axis. We need units on the y-axis, and when we draw our bars, we should include spaces between. Okay, for hand-drawn column graphs, you need to grab a sharp lead pencil, a ruler, and some graph paper. Now, there's some graph paper to download from Canvas. I'm going to use what's called 5mm graph paper. If you don't have access, then you can also just try Googling. Like, there is tons of graph paper available, and then print it out. As a last resort, if you don't have graph paper, just use a page in your exercise book. Make sure it's ruled so that you can use these lines to help you stay straight. I've got some data here from an experiment. So you can imagine this as part of your experiment write-up, and we're looking at which brand of fertilizer is best for growing a plant. So down after your method or our procedure, we're going to have a table of results. So we've got 3 brands of fertilizer that we're looking at here. There was also a control, and after a certain amount of time, the height was measured. So down towards the bottom of our graph paper, now I don't have lots of data points, so I can be quite generous with the amount of space that I leave down here. Just because I'm using graph paper doesn't mean that I need to crowd myself down in these white edges. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark an origin. And marking the origin just here, and now I can grab my ruler and place it along that edge and very carefully and very neatly draw my line right across to the edge of the graph paper. And now you've got your X and Y axis drawn. You can probably very carefully rub out that origin point if you want to, and we're now ready to begin working with our X-axis categories. I'm going to leave a remember this is 5mm grid paper, so I'm going to leave a 1 centimeter space at the beginning, and I'm going to make each category 1.5 centimeters or 3 grids, 3 units on my paper. So just to illustrate, I'll just pop that first label in there. With our y-axis, these measurements here, these heights, are actually fairly easy. I'm using 5mm grid paper, which means that one of these is worth 1 centimeters. And 11 centimeters, I've put my ruler up against the edge here, and 11 centimeters does come up quite nicely towards the top of the paper. So in this particular case, working out the scale is actually fairly simple. So we'll start with 0 down here, and then I'll put 1 centimeter here, and 2, 3, and so on. So we'll add our units in along the y-axis. So 1 centimeter for each. And because my data goes up to 11, I'm just going to go up to the next one because that shows that no plants will ever reach 12. And the last thing that I'll do is I will add my label for the y-axis and units. Notice that with your units, they're always in brackets. Moving back down to our x-axis, we're going to now, because we've got the scale, we can now finish off this first column here. So this is brand X, which goes up to 9 centimeters. So I'm going to continue that line up to 9, continue my other line up to 9. I'm going to add in my crossbar, and then you can, if you like, shade in that column. We're going to add in the rest of the data, including the control. And finally, along the x-axis, you're going to put the label. So in this case, it was the brand of fertilizer. And the last thing that we have to do is make sure that we have an appropriate title. So this is quite important. What we always try and do with a title in science is we try and refer back to our variable names. So the amount of plant growth, or the height of the plants, the amount of plant growth with different brands of fertilizer, you can now visualize what this data is doing. So our last step now is to describe these results. Remember, with a column graph, we're very interested in comparing groups or categories. So you would want to compare or refer to these categories. So this sort of statement would typically appear in the discussion and the conclusion. So all plants gained more height with fertilizer than without. So if you have a look at your control here, the control only got up to 4 centimeters, but with fertilizer, the three of them were better. So it was better to use fertilizer than not to use fertilizer. So we say that right from the beginning. All plants gain more height with fertilizer than without. Fertilizer brand Y was the most effective. The plant grown with brand Y grew 11 centimeters compared with X, which grew 9 centimeters, and brand Z, which grew 7 centimeters. So it's a nice statement there because it clearly restates what the column graph tells us. And in science, we always refer to actual data points to back up our statements.